Okay, let's unpack this. There's been a huge, well, really a fundamental shift in how companies have to talk about cybersecurity, and honestly, it affects everyone, right? From the C-suite down to the everyday investor. Our digital world is just constantly evolving, and unfortunately, so are the threats. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's new requirements for cybersecurity disclosures, the SEC's rules. Think of this as your shortcut, really. Your way to understand why these changes are such a big deal and what they actually ask of public companies. We're pulling insights today mainly from three great sources: Deloitte's Heads Up, PwC's SEC's Cyber Disclosure Rule, and also Dragos' piece, the SEC's new Cybersecurity Disclosure Rule. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Why did the SEC step in now? Well, it's pretty clear it's all about protecting investors, especially in a world where cyber risk is just, well, it's escalating like crazy. We've got all this widespread digital tech, AI exploding everywhere, the, permanent shift to hybrid work, crypto assets popping up, and sadly, a big increase in illicit profits from things like ransomware and stolen data. All of this just massively cranks up the cybersecurity risk and the cost, right, for companies and ultimately for you, the investor.
Exactly. And what's really standing out here, what companies are sort of grappling with, is that this isn't just about reporting after something bad happens anymore. This new rule, it's forcing a fundamental rethink of how cyber risk is managed, how it's governed, and how it's reported, right up to the highest levels, the board included.
So it's way beyond just the IT department's problem now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the SEC did issue guidance before, back in 2011 and 2018, but those were more like suggestions, interpretive guidance. This new final rule, though, it establishes concrete new requirements. It's mandatory. It covers everything. How companies handle and report material cyber incidents, how they talk about cyber risk in their MD&A.
That's the management discussion and analysis bit, right?
Right, exactly. Where they explain their financial condition, operations. It also gets into their internal procedures, escalation, board oversight. It's a really significant shift. We're moving from what was, largely statutory guidance to truly actionable disclosures. The goal is making sure investors get timely, consistent, and genuinely decision-useful information about how companies are actually handling these cyber risks.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the SEC is telling investors, look, cyber risk isn't just some tech issue off to the side. It's a core financial risk, and you deserve to know how companies are tackling it. So with that context, what are companies actually required to do differently now? What are the big changes?
Good question. The final rule really introduces two main types of disclosure that companies need to get their arms around. First, there's a requirement for disclosing material cybersecurity incidents. That happens on a Form 8K.
An 8K, that's like the breaking news report for investors, right?
Pretty much, yeah. For major events, shareholders need to know about promptly. Second, there are new annual disclosures. These go in their Form 10K, their big yearly report. And these annual disclosures, they cover the company's overall cybersecurity risk management, their strategy, and governance. Specifically, detailing management's role and, crucially, the board of directors' oversight.
Okay, incidents and annual strategy. Got it.
And there's a third requirement, kind of technical but important, how this information is presented. It needs to be in inline XBRL.
Oh, the machine-readable stuff. Inline extensible business reporting language.
Exactly. Makes it easier for analysts and investors to compare data across companies, use software to analyze it, standardizes things. And importantly, these rules hit all types of periodic SEC filers. Domestic companies, foreign private issuers, smaller reporting companies, even emerging growth companies. Pretty much everyone.
Okay, let's talk about the one everyone buzzes about. That infamous 4-day clock for reporting incidents. That sounds incredibly tight. When does that clock actually start ticking? And maybe more importantly, what does material even mean when we're talking about a cyber attack? It's not always straightforward, is it?
No, it definitely isn't. And that clock, okay, it's 4 business days. But here's the crucial part. The clock starts after the company determines that the incident is material.
Determination, not discovery.
Right. That date of determination might be different from when the incident first happened or when people started talking about it internally or even when law enforcement got involved. Now, the SEC says these materiality determinations have to be made without unreasonable delay, but they haven't put a specific number on what unreasonable delay means for the determination itself.
Bit of gray area there.
A little, yeah. And what's a cybersecurity incident? The definition is broad. An unauthorized occurrence or a series of related unauthorized occurrences on or conducted through a registrant's information systems that jeopardizes the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of those systems or the data on them.
Okay, so unauthorized access, data theft, ransomware,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yes, and information systems is also very broad. It covers resources the company owns or uses.
Or uses, so cloud services, third-party vendors.
Exactly. Cloud-based systems, hosted systems. It means companies absolutely need to consider incidents happening within their third-party service providers, too. That adds a whole other layer of complexity, obviously.
Wow, okay, so it's not just about locking down your own servers. You need visibility into your partners, too. So once a company makes that difficult call, determines an incident is material, what do they actually have to put in that Form 8K? How do they balance being transparent with, not giving away information that could make things worse or help the attackers?
That's the tightrope they have to walk. If they know it at the time they file, they need to disclose the material aspects of the nature, scope, and timing of the incident. And, crucially, the material impact or the reasonably likely material impact on the company. That includes its financial condition and results of operations.
Okay, so nature, scope, timing, impact.
Right. Now, what if they don't know everything within those 4 business days, which is pretty likely in a complex incident?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
If information isn't determined or available when they file the initial 8K, they have to state that. Then, they need to file an amended Form 8K within 4 business days of figuring out that missing information or it becoming available.
So there's a mechanism for updates? That's good.
Yes. And addressing your other point, the SEC was smart about the security risk. The rules explicitly state that companies are not required to disclose specific or technical details about their response, remediation, or potential vulnerabilities if that disclosure would impede the response.
Okay, so they don't have to hand attackers a roadmap.
Precisely. It protects a response effort. And one more detail, kind of interesting for the finance folks. Failing to file that 8K on time specifically because of a material cyber incident won't affect a company's eligibility for Form S3 or Form SF3.
Those are the short form registrations, right, for raising capital quickly.
Exactly. So missing the 8K deadline in this specific scenario doesn't lock them out of using those faster financing routes. It's a small bit of relief, perhaps.
That is interesting. Some flexibility baked in, even with the tight deadline. But it still all comes back to this word, materiality. You said it yourself, it's a linchpin. How do companies actually figure out what's material? Especially when it's not just a clear dollar amount lost. I can imagine some intense discussions happening.
Oh, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. Materiality is the core challenge, the central pillar. Get that wrong, and the whole disclosure process is flawed. The assessment has to be objective, considering all relevant factors, both quantitative, the dollars and cents, and qualitative. The definition aligns with long-standing Supreme Court precedent, basically, TSC Industries. Is there a substantial likelihood that a reasonable shareholder would consider it important in making an investment
A
decision?
reasonable shareholder test.
Right. Or would it have significantly altered the total mix of information made available? That's the standard. And crucially, just because an incident doesn't cause huge, immediate financial damage doesn't automatically mean it's not material.
So qualitative factors can be just as important.
Absolutely. Things like the probability of a really bad outcome down the line, the potential significance of a loss, even if it hasn't fully materialized yet. You also have to consider the nature and extent of harm to individuals whose data was compromised, to customer relationships, to vendor trust, the company's reputation, its competitive position.
Right. Reputational damage can be huge, even if hard to quantify immediately.
Exactly. And even the possibility of future litigation or regulatory investigations, that can weigh into the materiality determination too. It's complex, which is why SEC Director Eric Girding strongly recommended companies set up a cross-functional committee.
Bring different experts together.
Yes. Accountants, lawyers, IT, and cybersecurity specialists.
Yeah.
People who can look at the incident from all these different angles to make that tough materiality call.
That makes total sense. You need all those viewpoints.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned third parties before. How does an incident at, say, a cloud provider factor into my company's materiality assessment?
Great question and a really critical point in today's interconnected world. The materiality of the impact doesn't depend on who owns the system where the incident happened. So companies are not off the hook just because the breach occurred on a third-party system they use. If the impact on the company is material, it needs to be assessed for disclosure.
Even if getting the details from that third party is hard.
It can definitely be challenging. The rules acknowledge that. Companies aren't required to name the third parties involved, which offers some protection, and the SEC clarified they don't expect companies to conduct extra inquiries outside their normal communication channels with those vendors. But the responsibility for assessing the impact remains. And another nuance here is this idea of a series of related unauthorized occurrences.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means even if individual incidents seem small, seem immaterial on their own, you have to aggregate them if they're related. Think about the same attacker hitting you repeatedly with small probes, or maybe multiple related attacks exploiting the same software vulnerability across different systems.
So lots of little paper cuts could add up to a material wound.
Exactly. If those related incidents, taken together, cross the materiality threshold, then the whole series needs to be considered for disclosure. This really implies companies need much better internal processes now for inventorying incidents, tracking related activity, and continually assessing the aggregate impact. It's a step up in tracking.
That sounds like a significant operational burden. Not just tracking incidents, but connecting the dots between them. Now, what about those extreme cases? What if telling the world about an incident right away could genuinely endanger public safety or national security? Is there any way to, hit the pause button on that 4-day clock?
There is a mechanism, but it's very specific and tightly controlled. It's a temporary delay provision. A company can only delay filing that 8K if the U.S. Attorney General steps in and determines that immediate disclosure would pose a substantial risk to national security or public safety.
So it has to come from the Attorney General, not the company deciding on its own.
Correct. The company has to notify the SEC in writing about the AG's determination. The delay periods are structured, initially up to 30 days. It can be extended for another 30 days by the AG, and then potentially a final additional 60 days in really extraordinary circumstances. Anything beyond that would need a special exemptive order directly from the SEC.
Wow. So 120 days max, potentially, but only under very specific AG-approved circumstances.
Exactly. And the FBI and DOJ guidance on this stresses that companies need to request this delay immediately upon determining an incident is material. They strongly encourage early outreach to the local FBI cyber squad even before that determination, if possible.
Get law enforcement in the loop early.
Right. And the types of incidents that might qualify are very limited. Think attacks using brand new techniques with no patch available yet, incidents involving highly sensitive government data, or maybe where a company is actively fixing a vulnerability in critical infrastructure and disclosure would jeopardize that fix, or perhaps where a government agency knows more about a broader threat than the company does.
So really specific, high-stakes situations.
Very specific. The SEC has set up an interagency process with the DOJ to handle these determinations efficiently. So yes, there's a safety valve, but it's narrow and requires government involvement.
Okay, that's important context. It's not a loophole for everyday incidents. So, shifting gears a bit from the immediate incident reporting, companies now also have to lay out their overall cyber game plan in their annual reports, the 10Ks. What does that involve? It feels like the SEC wants to see the proactive side too, not just the reactive. How are you trying to prevent these things?
You've got it exactly right. This falls under the new Regulation SK Item 106, Cybersecurity, which goes into Part 1 of the Form 10K. It basically covers two big areas: risk management and strategy, and governance. For risk management and strategy, companies have to describe their processes, if they have them, for assessing, identifying, and managing material risks from cyber threats.
What kind of detail are we talking about?
They need to explain whether and how these cyber risk processes are integrated into their overall enterprise risk management system. Do they talk to each other? Also, do they use third parties like assessors, consultants, auditors to help with these processes? And critically, do they have processes to oversee and spot material cyber risks coming from their use of third-party service providers? Back to that vendor risk point.
Right, that keeps coming up.
And Director Girding added an interesting clarification here. He said the SEC staff didn't intend for this rule to prescribe exactly what good cybersecurity looks like. They aren't setting the technical standards. Instead, the goal is to require enough information so that investors can make their own judgment about whether a company is practicing good cyber hygiene.
So transparency for evaluation, not dictating the how.
Exactly. He also encouraged involving the CISO, other cyber experts, and securities lawyers in the disclosure committee discussions. Again, emphasizing that cross-functional approach. Then the second piece is governance. This focuses on leadership oversight. How is the board involved? How is management structured to handle this? It requires describing the board's role and responsibilities in overseeing cyber risk. Which committee, if any, handles it? How does the board or committee get informed about risks?
Do they have to say how often the board discusses it?
They initially proposed requiring disclosure of the frequency, but that was dropped in the final rule. Companies can still include it if they want, but it's not mandatory. And then for management's responsibilities, companies need to detail how management assesses and manages these material risks. Which management positions or committees are responsible? What relevant expertise do they have? How do they actually monitor cyber incidents? And how does management report this information up to the board or its committees?
Listening to all this, the sheer amount of internal coordination required seems massive. This clearly isn't just an IT thing or just a legal thing or just a finance thing anymore. Who are the key players that absolutely need to be talking to each other for this to work?
You're absolutely right. Compliance demands critical cross-enterprise collaboration. It has to break down silos. You need the technology leadership, the CIO, CTO. You need the financial leadership, the CFO. You need legal, the general counsel. You absolutely need the top leadership, the CEO, and the board itself actively engaged. And internal audit plays a key role in validating controls and processes.
So pretty much all the key functions.
Pretty much. The SEC is sticking to what they call a two-pronged approach to enforcement. They want to see the right disclosures, yes. But they also want to see that companies have the controls and procedures in place internally to actually identify, assess, and escalate the necessary information for those disclosure decisions. It's about the plumbing behind the report.
The process matters as much as the output. That brings us to some really practical questions PwC raised in one of the sources we looked at. They had these 8 questions for SEC cyber disclosure success. What are a couple of those that really jump out at you, considering everything we've just discussed? Questions companies should be asking themselves right now.
Yeah, those PwC questions were very insightful, really crystallizing the challenges. One that stands out is, how can we effectively determine materiality of a breach or attack? It brings us right back to that core issue. It reinforces needing that cross-functional team, considering qualitative factors, looking at related incidents cumulatively. It's not a simple checklist.
Right, it's an ongoing judgment.
Definitely. Another key one they ask is, can we report within the 4-day period? It's a direct challenge to operational readiness. Remember, that clock starts on the determination, which needs to happen without unreasonable delay. So how quickly can you make that determination call? That's the pressure point.
Test the whole internal escalation process.
Exactly. And then there's a great question tied to the annual reporting. Are our organization's policies and procedures, risk assessments, controls and controls monitoring strong enough to disclose publicly? This really pushes companies. Are you just doing things, or are they robust? Are you aligned with recognized frameworks? Are you actually using the results of assessments to inform strategy? And are you monitoring if your controls are effective? You have to be ready to talk about it in your 10K.
Puts the spotlight on the substance behind the statement.
Precisely. And finally, one aimed squarely at the top. Are we getting the information we need to oversee cybersecurity at the board level? This prompts directors to ask, do we understand this? Do we need outside experts briefing us? Should we pursue more training? It puts the onus on the board's engagement. And PwC strongly recommends, as a practical step, doing those tabletop exercises. Simulate an incident. Walk through the determination process, the disclosure drafting, all within that 4-day simulation.
Like a fire drill, but for a
Right.
cyber incident disclosure.
Exactly. It's the best way to find the gaps, the weak links, the points of confusion before a real crisis hits. Frankly, every public company should be doing these regularly now if they aren't already.
Those exercises sound invaluable for stress testing the process. Okay, so let's talk timing and teeth. When did all this officially kick in, and what's the SEC actually doing to enforce it? Are they being lenient initially, or is the hammer coming down?
Good questions. The final rule itself became effective way back on September 15th, 2023. For the critical Form 8K disclosures on material incidents, most registrants had to comply starting on or after December 18th, 2023. So we're well past that deadline for larger companies. Smaller reporting companies got a bit more runway. Their deadline is on or after June 15th, 2024, so that's coming up very soon.
Okay, so most companies are already living under the 8K rule. What about the annual stuff?
The annual disclosures in the Form 10K, that new Item 106 covering risk management, strategy governance, that started applying to annual reports for fiscal years ending on or after December 15th, 2023.
So companies filing their 10Ks now for last year need to include this new section.
Correct. And that inline XBRL tagging requirement for all these new disclosures, that kicks in 1 year after the initial compliance date for each disclosure type. So tagging for 8Ks starts later this year for most, and for 10Ks, it'll be for next year's filings.
Got it. So the requirements are largely active. What about enforcement?
The SEC is definitely gearing up. Their disclosure review program staff are being trained specifically on this final rule. Director Girding did say the division does not seek to make gotcha comments or penalize foot faults. They want to help companies get it right through forward-looking comments and maybe issuing more guidance like C&DIs.
So maybe not looking for minor mistakes initially.
That's the message. However, you have to look at their recent actions. SEC enforcement cases involving cyber disclosures before this rule even took full effect resulted in some pretty significant fines for companies deemed not to have disclosed breaches sufficiently or timely. So the actions suggest we are definitely in a period of heightened cyber enforcement. They expect compliance. While they might not nitpick minor errors right away, failure to make disclosures or having inadequate processes could certainly draw scrutiny and penalties.
Okay, so the message is, aim for compliance. Don't expect a free pass, especially on the big stuff like materiality and timeliness. Right. So we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've unpacked the SEC's new cyber disclosure rules, from that tricky 4-day clock on the 8K for incidents to the much broader annual disclosures on governance and strategy in the 10K. We've seen just how critical that concept of materiality is and how this whole framework really demands unprecedented coordination inside companies connecting IT, legal, finance, right up to the board. Hopefully this deep dive helps you, our listener, understand just how seriously the SEC is taking transparency around cyber threats. It's all about ensuring investors get the information they need to make informed decisions in this risky digital age.
Absolutely. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, step back a bit. These rules aren't just asking for disclosure forms to be filled out. They are implicitly, powerfully challenging organizations. They're pushing them to elevate cybersecurity, treating it as a top-tier business risk, not just an IT issue, integrating it deeply into strategic planning, into board-level oversight. So it leaves us with a really important question to think about. In a world where, let's face it, almost every company is a tech company now, and every vulnerability can become front-page news, how will these SEC rules fundamentally change the definition of corporate due diligence? Not just for investors looking from the outside, but for internal stakeholders too. What does doing your homework on a company mean now?
That's a great question. Definitely something to mull over as you navigate this increasingly transparent and sometimes risky digital world. Until next time, keep digging deeper.